I'm really, really happy to be here, and I want to tell all of you how much I enjoyed my time at Hampshire and how many times I've thought about it, and how wonderful it is to see students from then who have come here today, and anyone who's supporting this. I'm so honored. The idea that this was initiated by ex-students just thrills me endlessly, so thank you very much. I'll just say a little bit more and then we'll look at slides. But seeing is how I came to the medium of photography and what I've been very attached to my whole life. The idea that you look around in the world, you see things and you take pictures of them. That's the basic thing, and it's really never shifted. And when I say see things in the world, I'm talking about eyes, heart, mind, and everything. So it's this combination of encountering what's outside of myself and at the same time somehow making an image that has something to do with that. And it's very hard to describe it beyond that, but that's been very basic. However, in the 70s, there was something called conceptual art that was around. And in fact, it started in the 60s. And I was very affected by that and very influenced by that because I'm a thinking type, partly. And so my work was affected by the conceptual art of my time, and still is. But it's still about seeing. It's more about finding a particular place to look than it is about anything else. And for individual pictures, I don't know what they're going to be until I see them. So it's still about encountering the world, even though it's more constrained at certain moments. Now, transformation, I'm not sure what that means. Maybe it means getting older, that you go through all this and everything is transformed. But I think what the development office suggested that I talk about, which I'll just touch on briefly, is the transformation in photography. From the early time of seeing, taking the camera wherever you go, there might be a picture out there, to things being made up and having ideas that precede pictures. And I think that goes hand in hand with the advance of the technology and all the things that can be done in Photoshop. And I will tell you, I've never been interested in that. I'm not saying it's bad or good or anything, it's just not what I care about. So the transformation in the medium, in a sense, left me behind, so to speak. Now, the interesting thing, as you can see on the walls out there, is that a lot of people say, well, did you do that in Photoshop? And I said, no. Well, what are those? And what those are pictures of things I see. It's just that there's a layer there in the first place, which is there are pictures of photographs, and they're inside windows, and the windows are reflecting what's outside the window, and then you have a montage, a collage, whatever you want to call it, naturally occurring, and we don't focus on that when we're walking around in the world, unless we have a camera or we're thinking about what we're really seeing. We have agendas of our own that determine where we're going to look and what we're going to see. And usually in walking around in a city, for example, we're going to look in the window and see what's being sold, see if we want to buy the dress that's in the window or whatever's there. Well, I was interested particularly in those pictures in the fact that Joanne and I were in situations that had Renaissance architecture in the background. And that was not consistent, but it certainly was a big motivation. And I loved the idea that I was seeing the modern photograph with the Renaissance architecture at the same time. So, without further ado, I'll show you some pictures. Some of them I'm going to go through very quickly. This is somewhat chronological, not completely. We were talking in the car about how you organize work to show, but I'm showing you this picture was taken in 1960 in Aspen, Colorado. For about 2 seconds, I was going to be a ski bum, and I kind of always liked this one. In 1963, I was living in California. I went to New York City. I think I was probably just beginning to try to show my work to people, and the Beatles came to New York City, and this was taken on Park Avenue. And then in 1967, along with a brief career in editorial photography primarily, I went to an event in Mill Valley called the Fantasy Fair. And I took pictures, and that event changed my life, because for about 2 years I did a lot of pictures of musicians and musical situations. So, I went to the Monterey Pop Festival, and I have here my book from Monterey. I am happy to sell it to you if you want a copy. And I'll just show a few shots just so you kind of know what was in it. This was a flower stand outside the Monterey Fairgrounds where the festival's held. I had no idea who this guy was. He had great clothes on. And so I took his picture. And I didn't even know until after the whole weekend was over that this was Jimi Hendrix. Nobody knew who he was. I mean, I found out who he was, but I didn't put the two together until later. So this is one of my favorite pictures from Monterey, and one of the things about it that's very important to me is that Otis Redding's wife loves this picture. And recently I got a request from her. She wanted to put it in a show about him. She asked if I would allow her to do that. And I said, well, that would be wonderful. Why don't you do it? Just give me some credit. Michael Bloomfield, some of you who know music know who he was. Jerry Garcia. Another one of Jimmy that most people haven't seen. Laura Nero. She was a flop at Monterey, but I liked her. She was misunderstood. She wasn't like a hippie, so she didn't fit in. Mama Cass. And nope, I took the other one out. So she's only Mama Cass once. Pete Townsend. Nobody had ever seen anybody destroy instruments as an aesthetic act. People were horrified. And so I spent the next couple of years hanging around San Francisco and photographing the Haight Ashbury scene. This was on summer solstice in 1967 at the beach for sunset. This was a guy I met through a reporter. He was a mathematics genius from UC who dropped out. This was in a place called the Hip Job Co-op. And people would hang out there. Maybe they'd get a job, maybe not, but it was a good place to hang out. And you probably recognize it's a poster of Timothy Leary on the wall. On the street. Not the same anymore. On the street at night. Kids who didn't have any place to go. I did a fashion shoot for a hippie clothing designer, and one of the models was Janis Joplin. And there are a few of these. This was my first foray into conceptual art. And I say that because this is a project where I knew what I wanted to photograph specifically, not who was going to be in the picture or what it would look like. So I went around and I would encounter somebody. I'd say, can I take your picture? I want to do a portrait. And so we did a series of pictures just on chance meetings primarily. And I had a very strong idea that I wanted to show, if it's possible to do this in an artistic medium, how, I don't know, a person just as they are. No expression, no smile, no nothing, just how they are. And the subjects were very cooperative. They loved the idea that they were going to participate in this. And I'd say, well, I'm going to push the button. Just concentrate on putting your energy on the piece of film. And that's how these were taken. On a tripod with a Hasselblad camera. And somewhere right where I found the person took 5 minutes. Some of them I went to where they lived. A lot of them, I got captions from people, some of which I've lost. It's been too long. This guy was a draft dodger, so he wouldn't sign a release because he was afraid he'd get caught. I always think this picture shows me about the time where these people were hanging out. I didn't set this up. They were just there. A man named Eugene, who was from the Haight Ashbury, the only person that I met who actually grew up in this district. And I heard the other day that he still lives there. Somebody underage who wasn't old enough to sign a release, he was sitting there as well. This was a young woman who lived in a commune. She was 16 years old and pregnant. Lots of women with the sexual revolution that was going on were getting pregnant and having babies with no visible means of support. I worried about them. People I found in the park. I think they were going to get on that motorcycle, I don't recall, but they were there with it when I found them. These two women were from Atlanta, Georgia. It was at the end of the so-called Summer of Love, and they were just sitting there. And they spent one day and left. Then I was asked to teach photography at the University of Minnesota, so I had to move. And Professor Liebling was out of town, and I didn't know what I was going to do, so I got my girlfriend who lived in Aspen, Roberta Neiman, to go with me to Minnesota, and we had a little tour on the way. So we went around Mount Rushmore, among other things. So the next pictures are going to be a whole sequence. I'm not going to talk about much. I'll mention some of the pictures. I never know whether to talk about the fact that they're all from my life. All these, it's like a narrative. All these things I saw during the course of my life. And they're particular in the sense that I saw them, not somebody else. And I'm not sure there's that much more to say about them. When I went to Minnesota, I didn't have to do assignments anymore. I could do exactly what I wanted. And I took random pictures trying to figure out what my vision was. That was a big issue. What is my vision? And I didn't know. So I would say these pictures have a sort of psychological content for me that are sort of tell me something about who I am and what out there symbolizes something to me. So aside from what we might call the fact that these are records of something, they're also, along with that word vision, my particular sensibility, if that's a way to say it, or sense of humor sometimes. Jerry will remember this was in Becky's Cafeteria in Minneapolis. This was at the University of Minnesota. The students were hanging a show in the gallery. Jerry might recall to whom he was speaking. I don't remember. I was home and he was on TV. And so I took his picture. And I'll tell you, this is a clue because I did a lot of TV pictures later. But the thing that fascinated me was it looked like the back of the television set was the wall behind it, like it was a window on the wall. So I was sort of fascinated by that quality. And I did some double frames sometimes, two pictures, one next to each other. Just happened. Find them on the contact sheet. More of this sort of what I'll call psychologically, I like to call this picture, what time is it? This was a trip back from Minneapolis to San Francisco in the Badlands. So the next job was at Hampshire College, and on the way to Hampshire College, I had a wonderful NEA grant And they gave me not enough money to do anything. In fact, I wrote them a letter and said, this isn't enough money to do what I want to do. So instead of doing the landscape photography that was expected, I said, okay, I'll take them from the car on the way from San Francisco to Minneapolis. So it became a project. And the interesting thing was, when I had been very briefly in art school, I was told I couldn't take pictures from a car. Nobody does that. You can't do that. And it sort of came, I was taking them then, and then it came out of me. And I was taking them then because my father wouldn't stop the car so I could, you know, compose it properly. So I would grab them as we drove by. So these are all from 1971, from the trip across the country, more or less in chronological order. The first ones are in the West. That's in Utah. And the idea here was the way photography, besides just seeing things, every time the landscape changed, I would take a picture, but the way photography shows us things that we don't know we're seeing. So the horizontal movement in the bottom of the frame, if you're shooting out of a car window, is going to be recorded. Although I imagine there are even devices now where the shutter speed is fast enough that you wouldn't even know that. But I was interested in that, and I was interested in the fact that you can really look at it if you want to, but we never do. And then sometimes you see things, you're not sure what they mean.
Or where you are.
This was in Colorado, in the high mountains. And that was in Wyoming. Actually, those are out of order. This is still Colorado. So there were formal issues then about that sort of minimal thing that was around in art of simple pictures that aren't too complicated. And this one, I remember it clearly. It was at 6 o'clock in the morning. We'd been driving all night, and the sun was coming up, and I thought, oh, I should take pictures again. And it's the one that I took then out of the front of the car instead of the side. Somewhere in the Midwest. Somewhere in America, lots of places. But it's very 70s when you think about it. Things don't look as new as they are now, or however one says that. It's in Hartford. And that's the drive from Hartford up, no, this is actually from Hartford to Amherst. Okay, these the next ones are just pictures I took. This is New Year's Eve, Florence, Massachusetts. Neighbor's house. Ooh, that's not sharp. Almost sharp. Anyway, again, these pictures all happen when I'm doing something else, pretty much. This is on the New York Thruway. The alternator on the car broke down. The car was being fixed. I was sitting there looking out the window, so I put the camera on the side of the window and took the picture. I've always been interested in the atmosphere of fog and mist. Friend Philip Perkis's house, a little pond, Christmas time, same time of year. Hampshire College. Somebody said they recognized that Impala, but
That was my car.
that was your car? Just like your car. It was snowing. Still in Hampshire. My husband Bill took glider lessons. So I started looking at the sky a lot. This one is in Coos Bay, Oregon. That's a wood chip pile. Those are logging smaller trees, grinding them up and sending the stuff to Japan, making lacquerware and sending it back. This was in Eureka. So there's kind of a theme in a lot of the pictures, not something intentional, something I notice now, of solitary figures and solitary things. This was at a Society for Photographic Education in Albuquerque, New Mexico, out the hotel window. That other one went by, I don't know why, but Joanna's right. I didn't touch it properly. San Francisco. I thought a lot about whether I'd leave this picture in. It's so sentimental, really. But I love animals, and I love kitties a lot. Went on a field trip with the students to Springfield to the, what was it called? Does anybody remember?
The store.
It's inside
The mall.
it's in, yeah, the mall. Right, okay. That was my cat Tweety. But she assumed that position when she was pregnant. On the way to school, Hadley. Isaiah, I think I was late for class that day. Thank you. Now this is an interesting one. I found this on a contact sheet fairly recently, and I printed it, and I put it in with this group of pictures, and I showed them, and I was looking at it one day and said, oh my goodness, that's my uncle. And I didn't realize that I had been in his office. I didn't remember. But I recognized him finally. So that's taken in Coos Bay, Oregon. Hadley. Thanksgiving. The neighbor's yard. Now one thing that's happening here is there's getting to be more and more atmosphere in the pictures, and they're getting lighter and lighter. I just sort of became obsessed with lightness. And I don't know any explanation for that. It was just an interest. Oh, another kitty. That was the red kitty. This was at Apiron. Sunny, is that right, Peter?
Yes.
And is it S-O-N-N-Y or S-U?
Short, her name was Sunshine.
That's what I thought. Okay. I think this was taken in Maine. San Francisco. I have to give another photographer credit for this picture. Dennis Hearn is photographer who still works in San Francisco. And he had taken pictures of these splotches on buildings, which was preparing them for painting. And so I was very inspired. I felt sort of guilty about this picture, but it's a little different because there's a person in it who has hair blowing. Okay, the next pictures are, and again, this is a whole sequence from all these years, these black and white pictures. My father died, I went to Southern California, and these few pictures were taken on that trip. Santa Monica. This was an airport gas station. In the desert in Southern California where my dad lived. And then with Robert Lyons, who's back there, and Jackie Hayden, and Jackie mentioned this, we would go out early in the morning, and I started a series, I'll call it, of early morning pictures when it was still foggy and everything was very misty. This is on the island in the river that you can see when you go across the bridge. Let's see which one are we, okay. This is at a Pyron Workshops also. Haydenville. This is much later. This picture is only about 6 years old. It's taken in Oregon on the beach near where I live. And this is the view from where I do live. It's a great place. Come and visit. I'm going to show you some of the pictures from Hawaii. I also did some in black and white. This is the Halimau crater in Kilauea. This is in Unionville, New York, where there's a farm where they save animals from... They take in animals who've been performers or have been abandoned or whatever. And I always thought this was such a weird place because there's all this... There were mansions being constructed in the background. The first day in New York City when residents were allowed to go downtown after the World Trade Towers went down. This is a sheep farm in Oregon. There used to be many, many sheep. There's only one place left, and they have thousands of them. So these are all lambs, and if you look around, there's like no ewes. You wonder where the moms are. Well, they were having multiple births. They give them hormones to make them produce more babies now. Canal Street. I tried really hard to take pictures on Canal Street. It's the only one I ever liked. 4th of July. This was one of the pictures from the Long Island Project, which was an NEA-funded survey grant. And Peter Schlesinger led a group of us out there, and we had a house, and we went out and we took pictures all over the place. And I like to go to the beach a lot, so I took a lot of pictures there. There are a few weird titles in here. So I'm in New York now. We're taking a little break. I've moved away from Hampshire. I quit my job. I'm in New York. And I went back out at night. And of course, I couldn't go out without taking my camera. So I just collected these pictures. I didn't sell them. I didn't do anything with them. This is a band called the Rockettes, British rockabilly band. This was at the Danceteria. See, that's the Rockettes again. They were very, very colorful. See, it's the bass players lying down in the foreground there. Lydia Lunch. Anybody who knows the music scene in New York then? Joey Ramone. The Bush Tetras. And then more pictures continued, the seeing pictures. I'll show you just a few of them in color. Canal Street. The Dutchess County Fair. I don't think I have to say anything about that one. Except there's an NYU poster in the corner. More sheep in Oregon. Actually, these were taken earlier. They were about to be shorn, so they've been gathered into a pen where it's way crowded. This is my walk to school. I saw Atlas one day, and there he was. Okay, so in 1991, I got a grant, Guggenheim Fellowship, to photograph Hawaii. And I'd been going there, and I'd fallen in love with it, and I had to get serious. So I have a book. I'll show it to you later. It's a limited edition. I can't pass it around. And some of these pictures are in the book. The book's bigger. This was my reaction to the most beautiful place I'd ever seen and what was going on there today. What Hawaii is like now. It's a Qingling ceremony, Chinese Buddhists, where in the cemetery, where they feed the dead every year. It's a native forest with eucalyptus trees, which are not native. Hawaii has all the endangered species on the planet because all the other ones have taken over that we've brought in, and birds have brought in, and Polynesians and everybody else. There's a rainbow in Hawaii every day. People think this, people might say this is a cliche, but it's the reality of that place. Every day there's a rainbow, and it's a sacred thing for Hawaiians. Rainbows mean that the king is okay. The last crop on Lanai planting pineapples. So while I was there, the agricultural industry died and tourism took over. And this is on the island of Molokai. Those are feral sheep brought in by humans and then abandoned. That's the case of a lot of animals in Hawaii. There were no mammals in Hawaii before humans arrived except for bats. Outside a temple. In Hawaii, everybody takes their shoes off like the Asian people do when you enter a house. Hot, very hot. This is an illusion. Photography doesn't really tell the truth. I like to say that when I talk about when I show this picture, because that's in a parking lot. There's 1 inch of rainwater in the parking lot. Hawaiian culture was revived in the 80s. It had pretty much disappeared. When I say Hawaiian culture, native Hawaiian culture, they are 1% of the population now. But every year they have King Kamehameha Day and have ceremonies. That's all happening again. And this was a hula halau, or a hula school, who were performing at 7 in the morning. And sugarcane. Sugarcane is dead in Hawaii now, except for the island of Maui. This was a cane fire at the end of it at 4 o'clock in the morning in a place called Pu'unene. For the last 30 years, I've been taking these pictures. I started taking them on the way to school, and it turned into a project. So there's so many of them to edit, I don't know if I'm ever going to finish it. This was in 1979. That's the first one. And they go all the way to the present. This was a Stop the Draft poster. And the walls changed a lot when I was photographing. Originally, it was when graffiti art began in the city, and there were people putting things on the walls, but not very much. Here and there you'd find things. And then it got commercial, and now it's full of artist work. And I know these are documents, but I don't think about them that way. I think that they're my pictures, and this is just my subject matter. And I didn't tell you this, but I started out as an abstract expressionist painter, and it had a lot of effect on what I would look at. Jean-Paul Basquiat was called Samo. before he became a famous artist. So I know many people have photographed the walls. They're all there. Hardly anybody really looks at them. They think they're messy and they try to erase everything. I think it's fascinating because people put all kinds of messages and all kinds of things on the walls, and I'm endlessly interested in it. And they get torn down. Sometimes they're there for a day. Sometimes they're there for 6 months. You never know. Sometimes part of them leave. This is sort of what we think of, I think, when we look at the walls. But I like the way that somebody wrote "I am" on the bottom of that column. Ralph Nader ran for president. You remember that? This is a really recent one. This was taken in 2009. This guy, he's a well-known poster artist. I really like what he does, and I'll mention that I was really interested in how I'd look at something and depending on the light, it would be transformed. So there's sun patterns on things, which change what it is. But his obey is a kind of signature. And you know, you probably can't see what it says because it's not quite sharp, but it says "Can't stop the bum" at the bottom right. This is Jesus, and I'm telling you that because you probably don't recognize him, carrying 2 boom boxes. So now these walls are full of people's creativity, just full. And you all know that it's all over everywhere. But it's a phenomenon that is always interesting to me because it's free. It doesn't involve money, it's just people needing to express themselves. I'm in a show at the Brooklyn Museum that opens at the end of the month called Who Shot Rock? And they surprised me because they decided to choose my television portraits instead of my rock and roll pictures. So the ones that are in the museum are these pictures. In 1983, I was home, I had a headache. I had sort of given up going to clubs. And Debbie Harry came on the television, so I decided to take a picture of her. And then it turned into more pictures of more people on television. I thought, I'm not going to go back to the clubs. I better photograph the TV set. And you can photograph dead people on the television set who are still alive and well there. This one's in the show in Brooklyn. David, do you want me to? I'll tell you the name. That's David Byrne. Younger David Byrne. That's young Madonna. Everybody knows who this is. Older Madonna. Okay, now the last group of pictures I'm going to show you, I've been doing another project that I call Wall Street, and that's what these pictures are. It's the neighborhood where I live. And I think Wall Street at this time is an amazing place. I don't know how many of you have been to Wall Street lately, but you can't get anywhere near the stock exchange. There are gates and lines and cops and assault rifles and all kinds of things. So that fence is to keep people out. And you have to be checked and have your ID checked or you can't get in there. So I'm looking over the fence at some of the traders who are out on a break. Another thing that has become an obsession is people on cell phones, which there, if it isn't a cell phone, it's a camera. Nobody's empty-handed. They put up barriers in the street. These are gone now, but they would fold up out of the street so that no cars could get down Wall Street, along with the cops and everybody else. But they've redone the street. They put in new cobblestones, and they have another system now that's not quite as ugly as this. So this is tearing up the street so they can put in the new cobblestones. And Grace Church, which you see in the background, now has a building behind it. So it's amazing how quickly things change. I think it's the busiest place in New York, actually. It's amazing there. So in this situation, I can't get close, I'm not allowed. So they all have to be taken on the other side of the fence. Cell phones and cameras. Or scooters. And that's the last slide.